The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when Irving thought he might go completely mad from the silence. And as he tore open the lavender envelope with hands that had forgotten the softness of a woman's touch, he never imagined that 3 weeks later his entire world would transform into something worth living for. Spring of 1876 had been particularly harsh in Wood River, Nebraska, with late snows that killed off half his cattle and left him working dawn to dusk just to keep his ranch from falling into complete ruin. At 32 years old, Ethan had convinced himself that loneliness was simply part of the bargain when a man chose to make his life on the unforgiving plains. His nearest neighbor lived 7 miles east, and the town itself was a hard ride that he only made when supplies ran dangerously low, or when the isolation started making him talk to his horses like they were old friends at a saloon. The matrimonial agency in Omaha had seemed like foolishness when his friend Marcus first suggested it 6 months back. Marcus had found his own wife that way, a practical arrangement that had blossomed into something resembling contentment. Ethan had resisted at first, pride making him stubborn, but after another winter alone in his cabin with nothing but the wind for company, he finally penned a letter describing himself honestly. He was tall, he wrote, with dark hair going gray at the temples too early, weathered skin from years under the sun, and hands better suited to mending fence posts than courting ladies. He owned 300 acres of decent grazing land, a modest herd that he was rebuilding, a sturdy cabin with 2 bedrooms and a barn that only leaked in one corner. He could offer stability, protection, and a home to a woman willing to share the isolated life he led. The response from Sarah Kensington had been thoughtful and articulate. She was 26, originally from Pennsylvania, currently living in Missouri with an aunt who had taken her in after both her parents succumbed to typhoid fever 2 years prior. She taught reading to children in a small schoolhouse, but yearned for a home of her own, for purpose beyond the confines of her aunt's increasingly crowded household. Her aunt had remarried, and Sarah wrote delicately around the fact that the new husband made her uncomfortable with looks that lingered too long. She wanted a fresh start, open spaces, and honest work alongside an honest man. She did not demand romance or passionate declarations, only respect and partnership. They exchanged 4 more letters over 3 months. Ethan learned that Sarah loved books, particularly poetry, though she admitted this might seem impractical for ranch life. She could cook well enough, tend a garden, mend clothes, and had once helped deliver a calf when visiting a neighboring farm. She was not afraid of hard work or animals. She asked intelligent questions about his land, his plans for expansion, his thoughts on whether the railroad coming through would help or hurt small ranchers. Her handwriting was elegant but not overly flourished, suggesting education without pretension. Ethan found himself waiting for her letters with an anticipation that surprised him. He read them multiple times, searching for clues about who she really was beneath the carefully chosen words. He told her about losing his parents when he was 19, about building the ranch from almost nothing, about the loneliness that had become so constant he barely noticed it anymore except on Sunday mornings, when even the birds seemed to have somewhere to be. He confessed he was not eloquent or refined, that his manners had gone rough from lack of use, but that he would never raise his hand to her or speak cruel words born of drink. He did not touch alcohol after watching what it did to his father. Their 6th letter contained a proposal. Ethan wrote it 3 times before sending the final version, each draft sounding either too cold or too desperate. He settled on straightforward honesty. He would send money for her passage to Wood River. They would marry upon her arrival. He would build an addition to the cabin before winter to give them more space. He promised to treat her with dignity, to value her opinions, to share the burdens and rewards of ranch life equally. If she agreed, he would meet her at the station with a wagon and whatever courage he could muster. Sarah's acceptance arrived with remarkable speed. She would depart Missouri on the 15th of May and arrive in Wood River on the 21st. She thanked him for his honesty and promised to bring that same honesty into their marriage. She signed the letter with her full name, and then, in a postscript that made his chest tighten unexpectedly, added that she hoped they might eventually find friendship in addition to partnership. Ethan spent the 3 weeks before her arrival in a frenzy of preparation that his horses definitely noticed. He repaired everything that could be repaired, whitewashed the cabin's exterior, built new shutters for the windows, cleaned with a thoroughness that would have made his mother proud, and purchased fabric in town to make curtains because some half-remembered notion told him women cared about such things. He bought a new bedstead from the carpenter, blankets that did not smell like horses, dishes to replace his battered tin plates, and after much deliberation, a small writing desk that he placed near the window with the best light. If she loved books and words, maybe she would appreciate a space for such things. The morning of May 21st dawned clear and bright. Ethan bathed in the creek despite the cold water, shaved carefully around his jaw, and dressed in his only good shirt, and the suit jacket he had not worn since attending Marcus's wedding. He hitched his 2 most reliable horses to the wagon, laid clean blankets across the seat, and started the 2-hour journey to town with his stomach in knots. Wood River's train station was little more than a covered platform and a small office, but it served the growing community well enough. Ethan arrived an hour early and spent the time pacing, checking his appearance in the station window, and wondering if Sarah would take one look at him and demand to be sent straight back to Missouri. The marriage license was already secured, tucked in his jacket pocket next to the simple gold band he had purchased from the jeweler. Reverend Thomas had agreed to perform a brief ceremony at the church as soon as Sarah was willing. The train's whistle echoed across the plains long before the engine appeared, a lonely sound that matched the hammering of Ethan's heart. He positioned himself on the platform, hat in hand, trying to appear welcoming rather than terrified. The train wheezed to a stop with a screech of brakes and a cloud of steam. Several passengers disembarked, traveling salesmen, and a family with small children, an older gentleman with a cane. Then she stepped down, one gloved hand accepting the conductor's assistance, a worn carpet bag in the other, and Ethan forgot how to breathe. Sarah Kensington was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the pale skin or auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a simple bonnet. It was something in the way she carried herself, straight-backed despite obvious travel weariness, eyes scanning the platform with intelligence and perhaps a touch of nervousness that matched his own. She wore a practical traveling dress in dark blue, slightly dusty from the journey, and stood about average height for a woman. When her gaze finally landed on him, recognition flickered across her features, perhaps because he was the only man standing alone on the platform looking like he might faint at any moment. Ethan forced his legs to move, crossing to her in what he hoped resembled a normal walk rather than the lurching panic he felt. Up close, he could see that her eyes were hazel, shifting between green and brown depending on the light, and that faint freckles dusted her nose despite the bonnet's protection. "Miss Kensington," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. "I am Ethan Irving. Welcome to Wood River." She smiled, and it transformed her entire face from merely pretty to genuinely warm. "Mr. Irving, thank you for meeting me. I confess the journey was longer than I anticipated. Just Ethan, please, and I imagine Missouri is not a short distance." He gestured helplessly toward her bag. "Is this all you brought? I have a trunk as well. The conductor said it would be unloaded shortly." She paused, studying his face with a directness that was neither bold nor shy. "You look like your description, though you did not mention the gray in your hair suited you." Heat crept up his neck. "You look nothing like I imagined. I mean, you are far more. That is, your letters did not." He stopped, realizing he was making it worse. "I am better with cattle than words, I am afraid. Then we are fortunate I brought enough words for both of us." Her smile remained gentle, taking the edge off what could have been a sharp observation. "Though I suspect I will learn the language of cattle soon enough." They collected her trunk, a battered but solid piece that had clearly traveled more than just from Missouri. Ethan loaded both bag and trunk into the wagon with ease, then handed Sarah up onto the seat. She arranged her skirts practically, not fussing, and looked around the small town with evident curiosity rather than disappointment. "It is smaller than I expected," she said as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "But I find that rather comforting. I never truly belonged in larger cities." "Wood River is growing," Ethan said, guiding the horses onto the main street. "Railroad brought more people, more business. We have a proper general store now, a church, a school that might need a teacher come fall if you are interested, a blacksmith, and 2 saloons, though I avoid both. You mentioned in your letter that you do not drink. My father died from it." "Not directly, but he made choices when drunk that sober him never would have. Rode his horse into a ravine one night, broke his neck." Ethan had not meant to share that so quickly, but something about her calm presence loosened his tongue. "My mother passed a year later. Doctors said it was her heart, but I think it was grief." Sarah was quiet for a moment as they left town behind, the plains opening up around them in rolling waves of green and gold. "I am sorry. Losing parents is a particular kind of loneliness. Your letters mention typhoid." "Within 3 days of each other." Her voice remained steady, but he caught the tightness around her eyes. "My father fell ill first. My mother was nursing him when she contracted it. I was visiting a friend and had not been exposed. By the time I returned, they were both gone." "And your aunt took you in." "She did. I am grateful for that, truly, but her new husband—" She trailed off, then seemed to decide something. "He made improper advances, nothing I could not fend off, but enough to make staying impossible. When I saw your advertisement, it felt like Providence." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "I promise you will never face such behavior from me without invitation. When we marry, it will be at your pace. I am asking for a wife, not something else." She turned to look at him fully then, and he felt the weight of her assessment. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded. "I believe you. I am a good judge of character, Mr. Irving. Ethan. And my instincts about you feel sound." The ride to the ranch took them through land that Ethan loved despite its challenges. He pointed out landmarks, the creek that ran year-round, the stand of cottonwoods that marked the northern boundary of his property, the distant shapes of his cattle grazing on spring grass. Sarah asked questions about water rights, predators, the growing season, storage for winter feed. They were practical questions that showed she had been thinking seriously about this life. When the cabin came into view, Ethan felt a fresh wave of nervousness. It looked even smaller than usual, more isolated. But Sarah leaned forward slightly, studying it with what seemed like genuine interest. "You built this yourself, most of it. Had help with the roof. It is not much, but it is solid. Good foundation, thick walls for winter, and the location gives us shelter from the worst winds." He pulled the wagon to a stop near the front door. "I have been working on improvements. There is a root cellar. A chicken coop, though I admit the chickens are not currently populated, and the barn holds 4 horses and has room for supplies. Sarah climbed down before he could assist her, walking toward the cabin with purpose. She tested the bottom step with her boot, checking its sturdiness, then opened the door without waiting for invitation. Ethan followed, suddenly seeing his home through her eyes. The single main room with its stone fireplace, the kitchen area with its new dishes displayed perhaps too carefully, the curtains he had hung slightly crooked, the 2 doors leading to small bedrooms, the writing desk positioned hopefully by the window. She walked slowly through the space, running her hand along the smooth table he had built last winter, examining the books on the small shelf, most of them practical volumes on animal husbandry and farming techniques. When she reached the writing desk, she stopped completely. "You made this space for me." It was not a question, but he answered anyway. "You mentioned loving to write. I thought you might want somewhere for that." Sarah turned to face him, and he was startled to see tears shimmering in her eyes, though none fell. "In all my imaginings of what this arrangement might be, I never expected thoughtfulness, respect, hopefully, civility, certainly, but this." She gestured at the desk, the curtains, the small vase of wildflowers he had picked that morning in a moment of sentimentality. "This is kindness." Ethan felt completely out of his depth with her tears, even unshed ones. "I want you to be happy here, or at least not miserable. I know it is not what you are accustomed to." "You know nothing of what I am accustomed to," she said, but her tone was gentle. "My aunt's house was crowded and tense. I slept on a small cot in a room I shared with 2 cousins. I had no space that was mine, no quiet for thinking or writing. This." She spread her arms to encompass the cabin. "This is more than I hoped for." Something loosened in Ethan's chest, a knot he had not realized he was carrying. "Would you like to rest from your journey, or I could show you the rest of the property, whatever you prefer?" "I would like to marry you." The directness of it caught him completely off guard. "Now, if possible. I have no family to invite, no need for elaborate ceremony. I came here to begin a new life, and I see no purpose in delaying." She smiled at his expression. "Unless you have doubts." "No doubts," he said quickly. "Just surprise. I thought perhaps you would want time to be certain." "I am as certain as I will ever be. You are a good man, Ethan Irving. I knew it from your letters, and meeting you has only confirmed it. So yes, I would like to marry you now, today. Then we can begin learning how to be partners without this strange uncertainty hanging over us." Ethan found himself nodding. "Reverend Thomas is expecting us whenever we are ready. I have the license. We would need witnesses, but Marcus and his wife Emma live not too far. I could ride and fetch them. Then let us do that." Sarah untied her bonnet, setting it on the writing desk with a decisiveness that suggested the matter was settled. "But first, might I have some water?" The train was remarkably dusty. Ethan hurried to pour water from the pitcher into one of his new glasses, feeling foolish for not offering immediately. She drank it gratefully, then looked at him with amusement dancing in her hazel eyes. "You appear terrified. Are you reconsidering?" "Not remotely. I am simply trying to understand how I ended up so fortunate." The words came out before he could think better of them, raw and honest in a way that made him want to immediately take them back. But Sarah's expression softened into something he could not quite name. "Ask me that again in 6 months when I have burned supper and complained about the isolation and proven myself far more difficult than my letters suggested. I suspect you will prove yourself far more remarkable than your letters suggested, and I do not mind burned supper." She laughed, a sound that filled the cabin with life it had been missing. "Then we should get along well enough. Now go fetch your friends while I make myself presentable for a wedding." Ethan rode faster than necessary to Marcus's place, his thoughts spinning. Marcus answered his frantic knock with flour on his hands and confusion on his face, until Ethan explained. Emma, Marcus's wife of 2 years, squealed with delight and immediately began shouting instructions about flowers and what they should wear. Within the hour, all 4 of them were riding back toward Wood River. Emma and Sarah squeezed onto the wagon seat together, already talking like old friends. Reverend Thomas met them at the small white church with his usual quiet efficiency. He was an older man who had seen enough frontier weddings to find nothing unusual about the hasty arrangements. The ceremony was brief and simple, conducted in the church's modest sanctuary with afternoon light streaming through plain glass windows. Marcus and Emma stood as witnesses, beaming at Ethan with encouraging smiles. Ethan spoke his vows in a voice that only shook slightly, promising to honor and protect Sarah, to share his life and home with her, to treat her with the respect she deserved. Sarah's voice was steadier, clear and calm as she promised to stand beside him, to build a home together, to face whatever challenges came with courage and partnership. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan hesitated over whether he should kiss her. Sarah resolved the question by rising on her toes and pressing a brief, soft kiss to his lips that lasted only a moment but somehow changed everything. They were married. This remarkable woman was now his wife. Emma insisted they come for supper to celebrate, refusing to take no for an answer despite Ethan's protests that Sarah must be exhausted. But Sarah accepted the invitation readily, and soon they were all crowded around Marcus and Emma's table, eating roasted chicken and potatoes while Emma peppered Sarah with questions about Missouri and her journey, and how she was finding Nebraska so far. "It is beautiful in a stark way," Sarah said, accepting a second helping of potatoes. "So much sky. In Pennsylvania, the trees were so thick you sometimes forgot the sky existed. Here it feels like you could see forever." "Wait until winter," Marcus said with a grin. "When that sky turns gray and stays gray for weeks, then you will be cursing all that openness." "Marcus," Emma scolded, but Sarah laughed. "I am not so delicate as all that. I have survived Pennsylvania winters and they were nothing to take lightly. Still, it is an adjustment." Emma reached over to pat Sarah's hand. "But you have Ethan, and he is one of the good ones. If you need anything, if you ever feel lonely out there, you ride over here. It is only an hour if you push the horses, and you are always welcome." "Thank you," Sarah said, and Ethan could hear the genuine gratitude in her voice. "I appreciate that more than you know. I confess I worried about the isolation." "It is harder some days than others," Emma admitted, "but you find your rhythms. And truly, the community here is kind. People look after each other because we have to. Come to church on Sundays and you will meet everyone worth knowing." They stayed until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ethan finally stood, offering his hand to Sarah. "We should head back while there is still good light." The ride home was quieter, both of them tired from the day's events. But it was a comfortable quiet, not the awkward silence Ethan had feared. Sarah leaned slightly against his shoulder as the wagon rocked along, and he found himself acutely aware of her warmth, her presence beside him. "Emma is lovely," Sarah said as they neared the cabin. "You have good friends. Marcus kept me sane these past years. He is the one who suggested the matrimonial agency. Then I owe him a debt." She straightened as the cabin came into view. "Ethan, about tonight. I know that as your wife, certain expectations might." "Nothing is expected that you are not ready for," Ethan interrupted firmly. "I meant what I said, at your pace." She was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that. I am not afraid, you understand, but I would prefer we know each other better before we share everything." "Of course." He pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, then helped her descend. "You take the larger bedroom. I will sleep in the smaller one until you decide otherwise. That hardly seems fair when this is your home. It is our home now, and the larger room has better light in the morning, which you will appreciate if you continue writing." Sarah studied him in the gathering dusk, then nodded. "Very well, but only temporarily. I did not come here to displace you from your own bedroom." They moved her trunk and bag into the larger bedroom together. Ethan showed her where the wash basin was, the trunk where clean linens were stored, the hook on the door for hanging clothes. It all felt terribly domestic and strange and somehow right. "I will be up early to tend the animals," he said, lingering awkwardly in the doorway. "But there is no need for you to rise so soon. Take time to settle in, to rest." "I am a rancher's wife now," Sarah said, already unpinning her hair. It fell in waves past her shoulders, and Ethan had to force himself to look away. "I should learn the rhythms of ranch life. If you do not mind company, I would like to join you in the morning." "I would not mind at all." He retreated to the smaller bedroom before he could say something foolish or stare too long at her hair. His room was sparse, containing only a narrow bed, a small chest of drawers, and a chair. He had moved most of his belongings to make space for Sarah. Lying in bed, listening to the small sounds of her moving around in the next room, Ethan marveled at how quickly his life had changed. This morning he had been alone. Tonight he was a married man with a wife sleeping just beyond the wall. Sleep came slowly, his mind refusing to settle. He kept replaying the day. Sarah stepping off the train, her directness about marrying immediately, the feel of her brief kiss, the way she laughed at Marcus's jokes, her hand in his as they spoke their vows. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were full of hazel eyes and auburn hair, and a quiet sense that perhaps loneliness was not, after all, the only option. Morning arrived with rooster calls, though they had no rooster, just the general racket of birds greeting the dawn. Ethan dressed quickly and emerged to find Sarah already in the main room, wearing a simpler dress than yesterday, her hair braided practically down her back. She had coffee brewing on the stove. "I hope you do not mind," she said, gesturing to the pot. "I woke early and thought I might as well make myself useful. Mind, I have not had coffee made by someone else in years." He accepted the cup she poured, taking a careful sip. It was strong and hot and perfect. "You are a better cook than I already." "Wait until you try my bread before making that assessment." She poured her own cup, adding a precious bit of sugar from the small jar. "What needs doing this morning?" They worked together as the sun rose, falling into a pattern that felt surprisingly natural. Ethan showed her how he fed the horses, explained his routine for checking the cattle, demonstrated how to pump water from the well. Sarah asked endless questions, wanting to understand not just the what but the why of each task. She was not afraid to get her hands dirty, helping him fork hay with determination if not yet skill. By mid-morning, they had moved on to discussing the vegetable garden he had started but neglected. "This soil is decent once you get deep enough," Sarah said, kneeling to examine the earth. "We could expand this section, plant beans and squash and corn. Potatoes would do well here, I think, and herbs near the house for cooking and medicine. You know gardening well." "My mother taught me. She could make anything grow, even in poor soil." Sarah sat back on her heels, shading her eyes to look up at him. "I have been thinking about the chickens, too. You mentioned a coop but no birds. I lost them last winter to a fox, have not replaced them yet. We should. Fresh eggs would be valuable, and I know how to manage chickens. We could even trade eggs in town for things we need." They spent the afternoon planning improvements to the ranch, Sarah's practical mind complementing Ethan's physical capabilities. She wrote lists at her new desk while he reviewed his accounts, both of them working in comfortable silence punctuated by occasional conversation. When evening came, Sarah insisted on cooking supper. "It may not be elaborate," she warned, pulling out supplies. "But I can at least provide something more than whatever you have been surviving on." Ethan watched her move around the kitchen area with growing confidence, learning where he kept things, making the space her own. She prepared a simple stew with salt pork and vegetables, served with bread she admitted was from town since she had not had time to bake yet. It was the best meal he had eaten in months, made better by the company. "Tell me about building the ranch," Sarah said over supper. "How did you start with nothing?" So Ethan told her about inheriting a small plot of land from his parents, about working other ranches for wages while slowly building his herd, about the first terrible winter when he thought he would lose everything. He told her about learning from mistakes, about the satisfaction of watching cattle thrive on his land, about his dreams of expanding once he had more capital and help. Sarah listened intently, asking questions that showed she was really hearing him, really understanding. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about her father who had been a clerk and her mother who had taken in sewing, about the books she had read and the dreams she had harbored of seeing the West. "This is not quite the romantic West of novels," Ethan felt obligated to point out. "No, it is better. It is real." She smiled across the table at him. "Romance is all well and good in fiction, but I prefer honest work and genuine partnership, even after just one day. Especially after one day. You have been patient and kind and treated me as an equal. That is rarer than you might think." They fell into a pattern over the following days that felt less like strangers learning each other and more like partners finding their rhythm. Sarah proved herself capable and willing to tackle any task. From mending fence alongside Ethan to scrubbing the cabin to baking bread that came out only slightly burned on her first attempt and perfectly golden by her third. Ethan found himself watching her more than he should, catching himself staring at the way afternoon light caught in her hair, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, the sound of her humming while she worked. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was interesting. Her mind was sharp and curious, her observations often making him see his own land in new ways. 2 weeks into their marriage, they were working together to repair a section of fence that had come loose when Sarah suddenly laughed at something. The sound bright and unguarded. Ethan looked up from his hammering to find her grinning at him. "What is funny?" "I just realized I am happy, genuinely happy." She shook her head wonderingly. 2 weeks ago I was miserable in Missouri, dreading each day. Now I am standing in the Nebraska sun fixing a fence, and somehow that feels perfect." Ethan set down his hammer. "I am happy too, happier than I have been in longer than I can remember." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that this arrangement had become more than practical partnership. They stood looking at each other across the broken fence, and Ethan felt the world narrow to just the two of them, the plains stretching away forgotten. "Ethan," Sarah said softly, "I think I would like to truly be your wife now in all ways." His heart hammered harder than it had against the fence post. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." She came around the fence to stand before him, reaching up to touch his face with dirt-streaked fingers. "I came here hoping for respect and security, but I am finding I want more than that. I am finding I care for you quite a lot, actually." Ethan covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss to her palm. "I care for you too, more than I know how to express properly." "Then show me." They abandoned the fence and walked back to the cabin hand in hand, nervous anticipation crackling between them. Inside, Sarah turned to face him, suddenly shy despite her bold words. I should confess I am not experienced in these matters. Neither am I, Ethan admitted. Not truly. There is a difference between experience and intimacy, I think. She nodded, some of her tension easing. Then we learned together. They did learn together, awkward and tender and patient with each other in the afternoon light filtering through the curtains Ethan had hung. Afterward, lying together in the larger bedroom that was now truly theirs, Sarah curled against his chest with her hair spilling across his shoulder. Ethan felt a peace he had never known. "I knew," Sarah murmured sleepily. "When I stepped off that train and saw you standing there looking absolutely terrified, I knew I had made the right choice." "I was terrified," Ethan confirmed, running his fingers through her hair. "I thought you would take one look and demand to go straight back to Missouri." "Never. Though I will admit you looked rather forbidding at first, so serious and stern." "I was trying not to faint." She laughed against his chest, the vibration traveling through him. "Well, you succeeded admirably. And then you showed me the writing desk and I knew you were not forbidding at all. Just kind." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, the outside world reduced to distant bird calls and wind in the grass. Ethan thought about the letter that had arrived on a Tuesday, about loneliness he had accepted as permanent, about the remarkable turn his life had taken. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked. "That I wrote to that agency expecting practicality and partnership at best. I never imagined." He struggled for words. "I never imagined I might fall in love with my mail-order bride." Sarah pushed up on one elbow to look at him, her hazel eyes wide. "Love." "Yes." The word came out steady and sure. "I love you, Sarah Irving. I think I started falling the moment you said you liked the writing desk, and I have been falling ever since." Her eyes shimmered with tears that this time did fall, tracking down her cheeks in silvery trails. "I love you too." "I did not think I would. I thought that was something for novels, not real life. But here we are." "Here we are," Ethan agreed, pulling her down to kiss her properly. "In the real, messy, imperfect, better than any novel life." The weeks that followed were among the happiest Ethan had ever known. He and Sarah worked the ranch together, making improvements, building toward a future that now felt full of possibility instead of mere survival. Sarah started a garden that thrived under her attention. They acquired chickens from a farmer outside town, and Sarah proved adept at managing them. The cabin rang with her singing, her laughter, the sound of her voice reading aloud in the evenings from the books she had brought from Missouri. They attended church on Sundays, and Sarah quickly became beloved by the Wood River community. She helped at the school when the teacher fell ill, advised several women on their gardens, and charmed even the most standoffish ranchers with her genuine interest in their lives and challenges. People stopped being surprised that Ethan had found such a wife and started simply accepting that Sarah belonged there, that she and Ethan together made sense. Summer arrived with its heat and hard work. They spent long days moving cattle, repairing fence, putting up hay for winter. Sarah proved herself surprisingly strong, capable of work that would have exhausted softer women. She also proved herself clever about ranch management, suggesting improvements to water flow and grazing rotation that Ethan implemented with success. One evening in late July, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors when Sarah spoke. "I am pregnant." Ethan nearly dropped the glass of water he was holding. "What? Pregnant? With child? I am fairly certain given the signs." She looked over at him, trying to read his expression in the fading light. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased, Sarah, I am." He set down his glass carefully and pulled her into his arms. "I am overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed," she laughed, relaxing against him. "I am terrified too. I have never had a baby before, and the nearest doctor is in town. But Emma has offered to help when the time comes, and she has delivered 3 babies herself. "We will manage," Ethan said firmly, though his mind was already racing through concerns. "We will get everything ready, make sure you have what you need. Maybe we should move to town as you get closer to your time." "Absolutely not. This baby will be born on this ranch in our home just as your children should be." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child, Ethan." Can you imagine? He could imagine it, and the image filled him with such fierce protectiveness and love that it nearly overwhelmed him. "I will take care of you both. I swear it. I know you will." They prepared through the fall, Ethan building a cradle from smooth wood while Sarah sewed tiny clothes and blankets. Emma visited regularly, checking on Sarah, offering advice and reassurance. Marcus helped Ethan put up more than enough hay for winter and repair every possible thing that might need attention while he was focused on a newborn. Winter arrived early that year, snow falling in November and not truly letting up until March. Sarah grew round with pregnancy, still helping where she could but increasingly focused on preparing the cabin for a baby. She remained in good spirits despite the isolation, reading constantly, knitting, occasionally venturing out on clearer days to help Ethan with less strenuous tasks. In early February, during a brief warm spell between storms, Sarah's labor began. Ethan rode frantically to fetch Emma while Sarah waited with surprising calmness, timing her pains. Emma arrived with her usual efficiency, sending Ethan to boil water and gather clean linens and generally stay out of the way while she tended to Sarah. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Ethan paced the main room, jumping at every sound from the bedroom, praying to whatever powers might listen that Sarah would be all right. He had never felt so helpless, so utterly useless. All his strength and skill meant nothing in the face of this most basic and dangerous of human experiences. When the baby's cry finally split the air, thin and wavering but undeniably alive, Ethan thought his knees might buckle. Emma emerged moments later, tired but smiling. "You have a son. Strong and healthy. Sarah is tired but well. You can go in now." Ethan entered the bedroom to find Sarah propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced creature with dark hair and lungs that clearly worked well. "Come meet your son," Sarah said softly. Ethan approached as if the floorboards might shatter beneath his boots, this moment feeling too fragile and precious to be real. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the baby with wonder. He is so small. He is perfect. Sarah guided Ethan's hands, showing him how to hold the baby. The weight was nothing and everything, this tiny person who was his son, his family, proof that his life had become something he had never dared hope for. "What should we name him?" Ethan asked, unable to look away from the baby's face. "I was thinking Thomas after the Reverend who married us, and maybe James for the middle name after your father. Thomas James Irving." Ethan tested the name, finding it good and strong. "Yes, that is perfect." The baby, as if recognizing his name, opened his eyes briefly, unfocused but already the same hazel as his mother's. Then he yawned, tiny and absurd, and went back to sleep. Emma stayed 2 days to help before Marcus came to fetch her, satisfied that Sarah was recovering well, and that Ethan had some idea how to help care for an infant. Those first weeks were exhausting and terrifying, and more fulfilling than anything Ethan had experienced. Every small noise from the baby sent him scrambling to check if something was wrong. Every smile from Sarah as she nursed their son filled him with gratitude that bordered on religious experience. Spring arrived eventually, melting the snow and revealing the land beneath. With better weather came visitors, the Wood River community eager to meet the Irving baby. Children were precious on the frontier, each one representing hope and continuation. Thomas was duly admired, and Sarah was praised for her strength and good sense. As the baby grew stronger and Sarah regained her energy, they resumed their partnership in running the ranch. Sarah wore Thomas in a sling Ethan fashioned from canvas, working with the baby against her chest. Ethan found himself constantly watching them, his wife and son, marveling at how full his life had become. One evening in late spring, with Thomas sleeping in his cradle and Sarah reading beside the lamp, Ethan spoke the thought that had been growing in his mind. "I want to expand the ranch." "Really expand it, not just survive but thrive." Sarah looked up from her book. "Tell me what you are thinking." "There is land adjacent to ours, about 100 acres. The owner is old and wants to move to town. He would sell for a fair price." Ethan leaned forward. "With that land, we could double our herd, maybe even look at breeding horses. The railroad means better markets. With hard work and some luck, we could build something significant, something to pass on to Thomas and any other children we might have." "Other children?" Sarah's smile was knowing. "You want more, if you are willing. I know it is dangerous what you went through, but Thomas should have siblings, brothers and sisters to help him run this place." "I want more children too," Sarah assured him. "Though perhaps we could wait until Thomas is sleeping through the night consistently before we plan the next one." They laughed together, and Ethan moved to sit beside her on the small sofa he had built. "You are remarkable, you know. I still cannot believe you took a chance on a stranger's letter." "That stranger turned out to be my husband and the father of my child and the love of my life." She set her book aside to take his hand. "Best chance I ever took." They purchased the additional land that summer after careful negotiation and consultation with Marcus about fair pricing. The expansion meant more work, but also more opportunity. Ethan hired a young man from town to help with the increased labor, and together they built new fencing, improved water access, and began building the herd. Sarah proved invaluable in managing the business side, keeping careful records of expenses and profits, negotiating prices when they sold cattle, even corresponding with buyers in Omaha about regular shipments. Her education and articulate writing opened doors that Ethan's rough letters never could have. Thomas grew from infant to toddler, his hazel eyes watching everything with intense curiosity. He took his first steps in the cabin during a snowstorm, lurching from his mother to his father and back again, shrieking with delight. He spoke his first word, predictably "Mama," while Sarah was working in the garden, making her cry with joy. 2 years after Thomas was born, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Catherine, after both their mothers. The labor was easier this time, quicker, and Sarah recovered faster. Elizabeth had auburn hair like her mother and eyes that would eventually settle into the same hazel. She was a quieter baby than Thomas had been, content to watch the world with solemn attention. With 2 children, the cabin felt increasingly cramped. Ethan spent that fall and winter building an addition, 2 new rooms and a larger kitchen, giving them space to grow. He built a proper dining table that could seat 6, planning ahead for the family he hoped they would continue to be. Marcus and Emma's friendship remained constant, their own family growing to 3 children who played with the Irving children during weekly Sunday gatherings after church. The 2 families traded help with major tasks, celebrated holidays together, and provided each other with the community that made frontier life bearable. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Good rains, careful management, and Sarah's business acumen combined to make the Irving Ranch one of the more successful operations in the Wood River area. They were never wealthy, but they were comfortable, secure, able to save money and make improvements and provide well for their children. Thomas showed early aptitude for working with animals, spending hours following his father around, asking endless questions about cattle and horses and land management. Elizabeth preferred plants, helping her mother in the garden that had expanded to include not just vegetables but flowers that brought color and beauty to the prairie landscape. In 1884, 8 years after Sarah had stepped off the train, they stood together watching their children play near the creek while cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. Sarah was pregnant again, just starting to show, and Ethan found himself feeling the same mix of terror and joy that had accompanied Thomas's impending arrival. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked, slipping his arm around Sarah's expanding waist. Taking that chance on a lonely rancher's advertisement, Sarah leaned into him, comfortable in a way that spoke of years together. "Not for a single moment. Do you regret writing that letter? Writing it was the smartest thing I ever did." "Well, that and building you that writing desk." She laughed, the sound as bright as it had been 8 years ago. "The writing desk did help your case considerably." They watched Thomas attempt to teach Elizabeth how to skip stones on the creek, the boy patient with his younger sister's awkward throws. The sun was beginning its descent, painting everything in golden light. The land stretched away in all directions, beautiful and harsh and home. "I love you," Ethan said, not for the first time but with the same intensity as always. "More each day somehow." "I love you too." Sarah turned in his arms to kiss him properly. "My lonely rancher who turned out to be not so lonely after all." "How could I be lonely with you?" They walked back toward the cabin together as the children raced ahead, their laughter carrying on the prairie wind. Smoke rose from the chimney where supper was waiting. The vegetable garden was flourishing. The cattle were fat and healthy. And everything Ethan had built with his hands and heart was thriving. The third baby arrived in December, another boy they named Samuel Patrick. He had dark hair and blue eyes that would change but never fully settle on Hazel, remaining instead a striking blue that came from some distant ancestor. Samuel was a laughing baby, quick to smile, charming everyone who met him. With 3 children under 6, life became a constant dance of feeding, teaching, correcting, and loving. The cabin rang with noise from dawn until well past dusk when the children were finally asleep. Ethan built a larger table, more beds, shelves for the increasing number of books Sarah accumulated. She taught the children to read almost as soon as they could talk, filling their minds with stories and knowledge. Thomas, at 6, began attending the Wood River School, riding in with Ethan once a week for supplies and lessons. Elizabeth would join him the following year. Sarah had mixed feelings about sending them to school, wanting to keep them close but knowing they needed the education and socialization. She supplemented their learning at home, making sure they understood not just reading and arithmetic but science and history and literature. The ranch continued to grow. They now ran nearly 200 head of cattle and had begun breeding horses as Ethan had long planned. The horses proved profitable, with buyers coming from as far as Omaha to purchase well-trained mounts. Ethan hired 2 permanent hands to help with the increased work, building a small bunkhouse for them near the barn. In 1887, when Thomas was 9, Elizabeth 7, and Samuel 3, Sarah found herself pregnant for the 4th time. She was 37 now, and both she and Ethan worried about the risks of pregnancy at her age. But the pregnancy progressed normally, and in early spring she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel Robert and Margaret Ann. The twins were small but healthy, and Sarah recovered well despite the double birth. With 5 children, the cabin was bursting at the seams. That summer, Ethan built yet another addition, creating separate sleeping areas for boys and girls, a proper room for him and Sarah, and a larger main living space. "We are going to need to name the ranch at this rate," Marcus joked during a visit. "The Irving Ranch is becoming the Irving Compound." "The ranch was always meant to be passed down," Ethan said, watching his 5 children play together. Thomas was helping Daniel learn to walk while Elizabeth read to Margaret and Samuel attempted to catch a chicken. "Now I know it will be." Life settled into new rhythms. The older children helped with younger ones. Everyone had chores appropriate to their age, and together they worked to keep the ranch running smoothly. Meals were loud and chaotic, bedtimes were battles, and there was never quite enough space or quiet or time. But there was laughter and love and purpose. Sarah still wrote, though less frequently than before. She had started documenting their life on the ranch, creating a record for their children and grandchildren of how they had built something from almost nothing. She wrote about the day Ethan met her at the train station, about their awkward wedding, about learning to work the land together, about each child's birth and personality. Ethan read these writings sometimes, marveling at Sarah's ability to capture moments he barely remembered in the chaos of daily life. She made their life sound adventurous and meaningful, which he supposed it was, though mostly it felt like work and worry and the occasional moment of pure joy. Thomas at 14 was nearly as tall as Ethan and showed every sign of becoming an excellent rancher. He had a natural way with animals and a strong back for hard work. Elizabeth at 12 was quieter but equally capable, managing the garden and chickens and helping Sarah with the younger children. Samuel at 9 was the charmer, able to talk his way out of chores more often than he should. The twins at 4 were still young but already showing distinct personalities. Daniel serious and careful, Margaret bold and adventurous. In 1892, 16 years after Sarah had arrived in Wood River, they stood together at a community celebration for the town's 20th anniversary. The Wood River that had been a small frontier settlement was now a proper town with multiple stores, a real school building, a bank, and even a small hotel. The railroad had brought prosperity and people, and the wild prairie was slowly being tamed into farmland and ranches. "It is hard to believe how much has changed," Sarah said, watching their children mingle with other families. Thomas was talking seriously with a young woman from town, blushing when she laughed at something he said. "Thomas is becoming a young man. It will not be long before he is thinking about marriage himself." "Do not remind me," Ethan groaned. "I am not ready to be old enough to have adult children. You are 48, that is not so old." "I feel ancient watching him court that girl," Sarah laughed. "Let him court. He is 16, and she is a sweet girl from a good family. Besides, we could hardly object to young people marrying, could we? We were different. Were we? We barely knew each other. At least Thomas and Mary have been friends for years." Ethan had to concede the point. He watched his eldest son with a mix of pride and melancholy. When had Thomas grown so tall? When had he started needing to shave? Time moved too quickly, the years blurring together into a tapestry of work and family and slow, steady growth. That night, lying in bed with Sarah curled against him as she had been for 16 years, Ethan spoke into the darkness. "I never thanked you properly. For what? For answering my letter, for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me." He tightened his arm around her. "For loving me when I did not think I was worth loving." Sarah pushed up to look at him, her face illuminated by moonlight through the window. "Ethan Irving, you have always been worth loving. From the moment you built me that writing desk, I knew you had a heart bigger than you realized. I built you a desk, you built me a family. We built it together, that is the point of partnership." She kissed him gently. And I would do it again every time. You are the best choice I ever made." They made love slowly, quietly so as not to wake the children sleeping in nearby rooms, but with the depth of feeling that came from 16 years of partnership, and 7 children and countless shared struggles and triumphs. Afterward, Ethan held Sarah close and counted his blessings until sleep claimed him. The years continued their steady march. Thomas did indeed marry Mary when he turned 18, bringing her to live at the ranch and work alongside the family. She fit in seamlessly, and within a year, she gave Ethan and Sarah their first grandchild, a boy named Ethan Jr., who was universally called EJ. Elizabeth followed her brother into marriage at 19, wedding a schoolteacher named Henry who had come to Wood River from Ohio. They moved to town where Henry taught, though Elizabeth visited the ranch weekly with their own growing family. Samuel showed no interest in settling down, preferring to work the ranch and occasionally ride into town to drink with friends and dance with various girls without committing to any. The twins were still young teenagers, but already Daniel was talking about studying agriculture at the new college that had opened in Lincoln, while Margaret wanted to be a teacher like her brother-in-law Henry. In 1900, at the turn of the century, the Irving family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Thomas and Mary with their 3 children lived in a new house Ethan had helped build on the eastern section of the property. Elizabeth and Henry came from town with their 2 children. Samuel still lived in the main house, though he had his own room in the latest addition. Daniel was preparing to leave for Lincoln in the fall. Margaret at 13 was still at home, the baby of the family now that everyone else had grown or scattered. Ethan looked around at the gathering, at the children running everywhere, at his own children now adults with families of their own, at Sarah moving through the crowd with grace and easy laughter, and felt the weight of blessings almost too heavy to carry. Marcus came up beside him, his own hair now fully gray, his grandchildren playing with Ethan's. "We did all right, did we not?" "Better than all right," Ethan agreed. "You were right about that matrimonial agency. Best advice I ever gave, though you did the hard part building all this." Marcus gestured at the ranch, the houses, the fences, the land that Ethan had expanded to over 500 acres. "You should be proud." "I am, but it was not just me. Sarah made all of this possible." As if summoned, Sarah appeared at his elbow, slipping her hand into his with the automatic ease of decades together. "What are you 2 old men discussing so seriously?" "How right we were to marry women smarter than ourselves," Marcus said with a grin. "Finally, you admit it," Emma called from nearby, making everyone laugh. The party continued into the evening, with food and music and dancing as the new century stretched before them full of possibility. Ethan danced with Sarah under the stars, moving slowly to a fiddle tune, surrounded by family and friends and the life they had built together. "Happy?" Sarah asked, echoing her question from years ago. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Ethan answered honestly. "You gave me everything, Sarah. Everything I have, everything I am. We gave it to each other. That is how marriage works when you do it right." She smiled up at him, her face lined now but still beautiful, still the face he wanted to see every morning. "I love you, Ethan Irving. From that first day at the train station until my last breath. And I love you, my mail-order bride who became my everything." They danced until the moon rose high, until the children were asleep and the guests had departed, and it was just the 2 of them standing in the prairie darkness, holding each other close. The wind whispered through the grass as it always had, but now it whispered around a home, a family, a life built from one lonely letter and one brave answer. The years that followed brought the changes that time always brings. Sarah's hair turned completely gray, though she kept it long and braided as she always had. Ethan's hands became gnarled with arthritis, making some tasks difficult, though he refused to fully retire. They handed more responsibility to Thomas, who ran the ranch with the same dedication his father had shown, but they remained involved, offering advice and help when needed. Daniel did go to college and returned with new ideas about crop rotation and land management that improved the ranch's productivity. Margaret became a teacher as she had wanted, running the Wood River School with firm kindness. Samuel eventually married at 30, choosing a widow with 2 children of her own, and settled on the western section of the property. Even the twins had children, giving Ethan and Sarah a sprawling family tree that filled Sarah's careful records. In 1910, at the age of 60, Sarah fell ill with pneumonia. The winter had been harsh, and despite everyone's best efforts, she weakened steadily. Ethan barely left her side, holding her hand, reading to her from the books she loved, reminding her of their life together. On a clear February morning, with Ethan beside her and their children gathered nearby, Sarah spoke her last words. "Best chance I ever took," she whispered, squeezing Ethan's hand with what little strength remained. "Love you. Always." "Always," Ethan promised, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I will love you always." She smiled, that same warm smile that had greeted him at the train station 34 years earlier, and then she was gone. Ethan buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, marked with a stone that read, "Sarah Kensington, Irving, beloved wife and mother, 1850–1910. She made a lonely rancher's life complete." He visited the grave daily, talking to her about the ranch, about their children and grandchildren, about how much he missed her presence in every corner of his life. But he did not sink into despair. Sarah would not have wanted that, and he had too many people depending on him. He continued working the ranch alongside Thomas, teaching the grandchildren the skills Sarah had helped him refine, sharing stories about their grandmother so she would never be forgotten. In the summer of 1915, sitting on the porch watching the sun set over land he had worked for nearly 40 years, surrounded by 3 generations of Irvings, Ethan felt Sarah's presence as strongly as if she stood beside him. "You were right," he said quietly, knowing somehow she could hear. "That writing desk was a good start, but what we built together was so much more." Thomas came to sit beside him, his own hair graying now, his own grandchildren playing in the yard, talking to Mother again, always. "She is still here in everything we do. She is. You gave her a good life, Father. She gave me a better one. I was lonely and lost, and she made me whole." Ethan smiled, watching Daniel's youngest granddaughter chase chickens while Margaret's sons worked on fixing a fence. One letter, one brave woman stepping off a train. That is all it took to change everything. It was more than that. It was both of you choosing to build something together day after day, year after year. I suppose you are right, but it started with that letter. Ethan lived 5 more years, remaining active and involved with the ranch until the very end. He passed peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1920, at the age of 76, in the cabin he had built with his own hands and shared with the woman he had married sight unseen. They buried him beside Sarah on the hill, his stone reading Ethan Nathaniel Irving, beloved husband and father, 1844–1920. He found love in a letter and built a legacy from it. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testimony to the respect he had earned and the family he had raised. Thomas took full control of the ranch then, running it as his father had taught him, passing those lessons to his own children and grandchildren. The Irving Ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what Ethan and Sarah had built together from almost nothing. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, embellished slightly with each telling but always maintaining the essential truth. A lonely rancher had written a letter to a matrimonial agency. A brave woman had answered. They had married as strangers and built a life together that exceeded both their expectations. In the ranch house that had grown from a small cabin, Sarah's writing desk remained, carefully preserved through the decades. On it sat her journals, documenting the life she and Ethan had shared, the family they had raised, the love they had found in the unlikely circumstances of a mail-order marriage. The final entry in her journal, written just days before her death, reads simply, "I answered a letter from a lonely rancher 44 years ago. He promised me respect, partnership, and a home. He gave me love, family, and a life beyond my wildest imaginings. If I could go back to that day in Missouri when I first read his advertisement, I would do it all again without hesitation. He was, and remains, the best choice I ever made. My lonely rancher who needed only someone to see the good man he was. I saw him and he saw me, and together we built something beautiful. That is all any love story needs to be." And so the legacy continued, generation after generation, built on the foundation of one brave choice, one honest letter, and two people who looked at each other and saw home.